Hello everyone, my name is Chris Titley and welcome to the FinTech Australia Podcast. The FinTech Australia Podcast takes listeners on a deep dive across the FinTech industry in Australia, focusing on the challenges, opportunities and big stories our community faces. Let's get to today's episode. Hi, it's Chris Titley here. As part of the FinTech Australia Podcast series, I'm joined by Andrew Black, Managing Director at ConnectID. Andrew, how are you this morning?
I'm well, Chris. Really well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you. Looking forward to learning about ConnectID. Andrew, what is ConnectID, I suppose, and a little bit of an overview about the business?
So ConnectID is a digital identity network. What that really means in kind of simplistic sort of terms is we allow individuals to reuse trusted digital identity sources that they already know and use, right? So if you think about today, typically you kind of go online. If you're looking to verify something about yourself, you have to pull out a passport or a driving license, or a piece of paper or something and take photographs of it. What we allow you to do is reuse an existing source like your bank, someone who already knows you, who's already been through that process, and allow you to use that just to verify you are who you are. So it helps reduce the amount of data you have to share. It's simple, it's quick, it's easy, and we're an ecosystem. Thinking about where we sort of come from as well. So ConnectID is part of Australian Payments Plus, which probably most don't know the name of as yet. It's still sort of fairly new as an organisation because it came together almost 3 years ago now, about our third birthday. But we run FPOS, BPAY and the MPP, so Pay To and Pay ID. So we've been running effectively domestic payment infrastructure for the last 30 to 40 years in different incarnations. And this really with ConnectID is that next step for us to look at, well, how do we help run data infrastructure and help provide trusted data sort of ecosystems and help protect Australians?
Andrew, fascinating backstory around the products that have been released over 30 or 40 years and certainly extremely well adopted and extremely well known and a lot of people might not know who's behind it all, so thank you for sharing that. I'm curious to know about the landscape here in Australia versus other countries, etc. Has there been any developments over the last year or so, I suppose, in terms of the landscape of digital identity?
Yeah, it's been a pretty big year. So 2024 has been really a bit of a transformational year for Australia when it comes to digital ID. The federal government passed digital identity legislation. It had sort of draft frameworks in place since I think almost 2016, and been working through what that looks like across a couple of different governments, and finally passed it sort of 1st of December last year. So what that means is that there's now a federal piece of legislation in place that allows for the sort of interoperability between public, private sector and sets some standards and sort of a trust framework and a trust mark. ConnectID has been part of that for I think almost sort of 3 years as well now. We've been accredited by the federal government as a trusted digital identity exchange, the first private sector one and the only private sector network to be part of that ecosystem. So we've been at the forefront of that with our partners, the four major banks in Australia for a while. But it's really interesting and really exciting to see it sort of come to life here in Australia. And we've learned a lot of lessons as a country and as an organisation from overseas as well, playing a little bit of catch up compared to some other jurisdictions. I think in particular ones that have successful adoption of digital identity and the Nordics, in particular, Estonia. You think about sort of bank ID and the use of that, and particularly in the Nordics, you've got amazing technology and ecosystems that work together collaboratively that have citizens using that service, well over sort of 270 times a year. So there's a sort of decades worth of learning for Australia to pick up from overseas, but really, really exciting year. Lots of momentum for ConnectID as well. But that landscape has really been driven by what, unfortunately, the other side of it is the need, right? So we've seen increases in frauds, scams, cyber breaches in particular. I think it's sort of 3 out of 4 Australians have been hit by some form of breach in some way, shape or form, which is a horrible statistic, but then underneath that leads to, billions of dollars worth of scams, leads to, real sort of tough personal scenarios where data's breached, data's leaked. So the Australian populace is sort of ready for a better way to look after data, a better way to look after their identity and to have more control. and choice. And that's not only what ConnectID offers, but also what the legislation sort of puts in place for. So the time feels right. 2024 is a great foundation year, and 2025 will be a sort of mainstream year for ConnectID and digital identity in the country.
Yeah, certainly some significant strides there in terms of the macro, but also, as you mentioned, an increasing number of scams and obviously at a lower level of not just financial, but there's a lot of time involved, there's a lot of effort involved, and a lot of people don't quantify that time in regards to, basically fixing up things or trying to deal with things, amongst their busy lives as well. So there's a lot of time element in that. You did touch on, Andrew, a little bit about ConnectID's milestones last year as well, against the macro backdrop and the shift and the trends that are moving forward. Can you talk about what ConnectID did in 2024 and why you're excited about 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been building ConnectID for, I think, pretty much 4 years now, with different sort of collaboration from banks, with input from state government, international expertise, and an amazing team that's been doing that across the industry. We brought it to market the very tail end of 2023 to sort of launch an MVP. And 2024 has been that sort of foundational year for us. And what that means is we've got all 4 banks on board as what we call identity providers. That means that's if you're a CBA, a Westpac, an ANZ Plus customer, or a NAB customer, you can use ConnectID now, right? So it means that you're already enabled, you're already set up, and you have that support and trust from your bank. So the challenges we've seen globally and also in Australia building a digital identity network it's a double-sided marketplace, right? So when we looked at how do you do that, you need strong identities set up there, and then also places people can use it, places people can use ConnectID to verify they are who they are. So that year one has been about getting all 4 banks on board, which is really exciting as a milestone. That means that well over 75% of the Australian population can use ConnectID with no new setup, no new app to download, nothing new to set up. And we've been really starting to roll it out across a number of use cases. So that's different sectors, different places where instead of having to pull out a passport or driving license or punch in your driving license number, you can just use your bank to verify you are who you are. So some of those are in rental, a use case that I'm sure close to a lot of people's hearts with some of the housing challenges at the moment and rental challenges, thinking about not only just every time you try to rent a place, but even apply to rent a place, the amount of documents sort of involved there, right? So we have some customers in the rental space, also in online liquor. So we work with Dan Murphys and BWS. They're both customers of ours, and across employee onboarding as well as in lending. So we sort of started off last year really building out that diverse set of use cases, because this isn't about financial services, really. This is about economy-wide utility. And then really excitingly, to sort of cap off the year, we announced that Telstra are joining the network. So Telstra will begin using ConnectID and have begun using ConnectID to verify their customers, upgrading their identity capabilities and giving their customers choice and control. So we've got a really strong sort of first year in the books with sort of 6-7 different sectors starting to come to life, and all 4 major banks participating and thriving as part of it. So 2025 looks set to be a really good one.
And Andrew, just touching on that, you've obviously got products like BPAY in the market, which all the big 4 banks use. There's a bit of a playbook around, I suppose, consumer education from the big 4 about, what is this? What am I signing up for?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the really interesting consumer education hurdles we have is this is easier than you think it is, right? We sort of talk a little bit about digital identity and get down a rabbit hole of different credentials or types or apps, but actually what this is just logging into your banking app the same way you would today with either PIN password or Face ID biometric, and clicking consent. So there's no new app to download, nothing new to install or set up. It's just logging in, verifying, consenting, and that's it. It's four or 5 taps. As a CBA customer, we'll have seen that in CBA branches and ATMs, we have education and awareness starting to let customers know that anytime they see the ConnectID symbol, that means their bank's behind it and they can use their CBA app there to do that. And we'll be doing that across the rest of the year with other banks as well, educating customers that this is new, but it's not as hard as we maybe make it out to be sometimes.
Yep. Andrew, in amongst the research for this podcast, I discovered the word interoperability. Firstly, I'm interested to know whether I pronounced that correctly. And secondly, if I have, what interoperability is in the digital identity space. And I suppose, what are the risks and key themes around that?
Perfect pronunciation. And it's a good reminder that for those of us who sort of live and breathe this space, and I probably say that word about 40 times a day, it's not a common part of the vocabulary. But really what it means is sort of making sure that anything we do and build, either in the private sector or public sector, works together, right? So it's about having sort of no wrong front door for customers, for citizens. And we've got a pretty solid track record of not doing that well in Australia, with sort of 8 different states, territories, different standards on digital licensing, so different approaches from federal to state. We're getting better, but I think that's the core for us of why we designed a network and why we designed a scheme that is based on global standards, right? So global technology standards that are open, that are interoperable. We don't build anything to proprietary sort of bespoke implementations. We want to make sure that anyone can plug in and play, here or overseas. But we design ConnectID as a network so that you can plug in once and get access to any different types of sources as a business. Because what a business doesn't want is to have to, if I'm Telstra, right, what you don't want to do is onboard New South Wales government, Service Victoria, my Queensland as different providers and a ConnectID. You want one way to do that, and citizens certainly want that as well. So it's really important. It's important from a legislative point of view as well. That's one of the reasons the bill is exciting, and the legislation passing is exciting, because what it will allow is, what we hope, what it'll allow is the sort of alignment of different regulations, right? So in financial services, AML, CTF, anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism legislation typically today relies on fairly traditional means of identity. Passing the bill will hopefully allow for or being able to use a reusable, trusted digital identity. So there's technical interoperability and then regulatory alignment as well. So really important, because it allows us to realize the benefits, right? The benefits for the country as a whole of digital identity. There's sort of broadly 2 billion identity transactions a year in Australia, right? The GDP gains have been estimated to be 3-4% of sort of productivity for the country if we get this right. And interoperability is at the core of getting it right and not building this thing 10 times.
Now, Andrew, I sense a business opportunity now, and if I start Chris's Digital Now ID company, how do I go about that? I suppose in terms of what you're seeing from what you've created and what other private entities may create, definitely not mine for sure, but in terms of other people's technology and state governments and even private entities who may come up with something and say, hey, we've got a better system. How do you work with them?
Yeah, and we welcome working with them. We work with far more than just banks. We look forward to working with Chris's identity provider when it's up and running.
When it's got a name.
Yeah, we'll work on it. We'll workshop it. It's the goal for us is choice, right? It's always been choice. Banks are a fantastic place to start. All of our research says that individuals trust banks, look after their money, trust and look after data, trust and look after identity. But the goal for us isn't to have 75% of the population covered, it's to have 200%, 300%. Because in certain use cases, I may feel like I want to use a different provider, right? Maybe if I'm opening a bank account, I want to use my bank to verify that. Maybe if I'm using government services, I prefer to use Service New South Wales, right? So the state that I'm in at the moment. So we work with state governments, hoping to onboard a couple of those identity providers and other private sector providers as well. And that's, again, with legislation, is actually really useful. It sets out a accreditation framework that is a transparent, trusted, I guess, sort of benchmark for what you need to be an identity provider. And also what our scheme rules and our network rules, one of our core roles is to help govern the ecosystem. Not often the sexiest part to talk about, but it's the really kind of core piece of how I know I can be trusted once I'm in the ecosystem and in the front door. So we set strong, strict standards, but again, goal for us is choice. So when you spin that up, come and let us know.
Maybe if I spin it up, we can talk, but I don't not in the immediate future. But I'm sure there's a lot of Chris's digital name ID companies floating around internationally. How do you go about potentially partnering with someone like that internationally, or some sort of case studies internationally that potentially you guys can work with to say, actually, here's a bit of a blueprint?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see a range of different approaches globally. So there's probably broadly three categories of what countries have taken in their approaches, right? Some go with a national issued identity, sort of Aadhaar in India, or a Estonia, which is a government issued identity, government led, government mandated in some cases. Very effective, but takes a particular sort of social demographic to be okay with that. And given Australia voted down the Australia card 40 odd years ago, I don't think we're in bucket one. Two is where sort of private sector leads, drives, and sort of gets out ahead, and that's where the Nordics and sort of Scandinavian countries have certainly set the pace there. And then three is a bit of a hybrid, so where you have state government, federal government, and private sector working collaboratively, which is closer to where Australia is, but also where Canada and some others are as well. So going back to the point, what we want to work with is those who are leading in each of their jurisdictions. ConnectID is leading the sort of private sector and the identity market here in Australia, and we want to work with those who are leading overseas. So we do bits of work with others in the UK, with Interac in Canada, and last year we did a proof of concept with DMP in Japan, looking at how do we align technical standards but also legal standards as well, right? And it's not about having a global identity, but it's making sure my identity works globally. So if I go on holiday to Japan, I have to check into a hotel or verify my license to hire a car there, not having to leave that paper trail all over the place as well, and being able to use, say, my bank to verify I'm who I am, and vice versa. My accent will give it away, but I'm not from Australia, obviously, originally. So when you think about the sort of migrant journey and moving jurisdictions, it's pretty hard setting up again, right? You start with, open new bank accounts, telco SIM plans, getting a job, renting, buying, all of that is
getting
really
married is a tough one as well,
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly right.
Lots of paperwork. Yep.
So yeah, really, really manual. So if I was able to do that using my UK bank identity, would streamline a lot of that process. So yeah, we're exciting. We did a proof of concept last year. We'll be taking that towards a pilot this year with the Japanese ecosystem and some amazing partners, banks on both sides, and technology partners as well. And it's just proving the capability and being able to sort of step over borders isn't as hard as we make it out.
You mentioned some of those countries out there. Is there someone out there, or at least something out there that you're looking at and going, they're doing really, really well, and some learnings that I suppose you can take from them globally to apply here? And obviously you've been building up for 3 or 4 years and you've gone live last year, but there's, obviously learning is a lifelong journey, but there's some other companies out there or governments out there doing a good job.
Yeah, I mean, it's the cliched leader in this space, but it's the leader for a reason, right? So the Nordic bank ID model, really is head and shoulders above probably anybody else who's been doing this. Now they've had a 15 to 20 year head start and, slightly different approach in how they set it up, but they have that absolute ubiquity, across being able to use my bank identity in the private sector, but also government services, doing tax returns or looking for benefits, the real sort of day-to-day use. I think that the stat is sort of well over 270 times a year for an average citizen logging in, verifying, using that service. So that ubiquity is sort of gold standard. We see little bits sort of coming out of some work we've been doing in Canada, which is probably a little bit closer to the Australian model, where you have provincial governments and banks sort of collaborating with telcos and working together. And they're probably similar in their journey and path to us, maybe a year or so ahead, but a similar model to learn from at the same point in time. So we're really fortunate that we're an Australian domestic ecosystem and piece of infrastructure. We don't compete globally. So we have meetings with a lot of these organizations on a regular basis and share best practice. It's a collaborative, rising tide for all of us when we work together.
No, absolutely. It's a great approach to take. Andrew, we are on the FinTech Australia podcast, and there's a number of FinTech companies that are listening out there. I suppose for them listening out there in financial services, what do they take away from this in terms of digital identity solutions? What do you think is the main challenge for them now, and I suppose in the future as the trends continue to rise in terms of a collaborative approach?
Yeah, I think the feedback we've heard from the last couple of years, speaking with fintechs and also just in industry in general, is the ever rising challenge of storing data, managing risk. How do I know my customer is who they say they are? How do I verify their identity? But how do I reduce my risk, right? So the traditional way that we sort of have verified identity for the last 20, 30 years of, originally walking into a branch or walking into a store with a document, then taking a photograph of that document and uploading it, comes with a lot of unnecessary and unintentional sort of consequences of capturing extra data. And that's where we see those breaches have really sort of kicked on and caused significant harm to people, but to businesses, right? The benefit of digital identity is not only that it protects individuals and helps reduce, their data footprint, but it reduces the amount that organizations have to store, right? One of the really good examples is we work with a really small e-commerce provider who sells knives online, right? And there's a regulatory need for them to verify the age of that individual.
Yep.
What we do with them is we just provide a is over 18 flag. They don't need to show the date of birth. They don't have to capture that. They don't have to hold it. That's pretty sensitive and valuable PII to a hacker. So they just get an assurance that, the person's been verified, they are over that age. So it reduces their risk profile a lot, whilst also improving the sort of conversion, the onboarding, and the sort of the sales funnel, which for any fintech is sort of the goal dust, right? How do you acquire more customers, enhance the funnel, simplify onboarding, whilst reducing your own risk? It's sort of win-win-win, really.
And for the fintechs that have taken a little bit away from that, what would be some sort of like one key point, I reckon, for you, for them to listen to about this podcast to say, or even the industry per se, about what is happening?
I think for them, they don't have to compromise, right? So there's often a sense of, to protect the business and increase risk, that means I need to store more things and look after more data and spend more money. What digital identity allows them to do is acquire customers, make that easier, but store less, protect themselves, reduce their, for example, cyber insurance premiums, reduce their risk and liability. You don't have to compromise.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, as a business owner, people think about that all the time, and threats and hacks and intrusions and what, customer data and what that means for brand risk. And we've seen some very high profile cases recently, which has sort of tarnished some brand risk, I suppose, in terms of the brand and what people are talking about. Moving forward to the future, before we get on to the FinTech Australia stuff, but moving forward, the vision of the future, what's your vision for Australia's digital identity landscape? And obviously the ConnectID product that you've built over the last 4 years or so. How does that fit in? What's your nirvana?
I think what we're really looking for and what we're striving to build is trusted national infrastructure that allows people to protect themselves, look after their own data, but make life easier, right? The sort of really sort of two massive opportunities that we see digital identity having a massive role in, and ConnectID being a core part of that, is the ongoing battle with frauds and scams. The linking of the more data that's out there about you, the more likely you are to be a victim of a social engineering or phishing or identity takeover attack. So how do you reduce that data footprint So digital ID is kind of really important. So reducing and battling frauds and scams, and we've got some amazing partners, thankfully, that we do that with. But the other part that we often sort of forget is the impact that a digital identity can have on those who are often left behind, underserved, and who feel undervalued in society. So those where the traditional documentation doesn't quite fit sometimes, right? So we do a lot of work with an amazing company called Wuna, who are trying to solve this challenge for First Nations Australians, right? Where birth certificates, passports, driving licenses, not really the sort of the answer, right? There's a huge sort of gap there. And then we also think about digital identity for those who perhaps have to leave the home quickly and point to sort of natural disaster, bushfires, floods, who don't grab a birth certificate, right? You just grab probably a phone and those things most valuable for you.
Yep.
But you then have to go and set life up again. Again, you're probably
start from scratch,
renting a new place, starting from scratch, being able to do that with just an identity
mobile
on my
plan,
phone.
get a gas bill, get an electricity thing. All people require IDs and credits of who you are and exactly what your background and your credit checks and all this sort of stuff as well. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So that's being able to restart again with just a identity verified on your phone just makes that process so much easier in a time that's really fraught with personal trauma. So we can help reduce frauds and scams, and we can make people's lives just that little bit easier. And that's where a sort of strong digital identity ecosystem and a ConnectID just plays that layer underneath of trust.
Yeah, I agree, Andrew. We're on as I said, we mentioned on the FinTech Australia podcast. It's we're sitting here at the end of Jan of 2025, believe it or not, already. A plethora of events on FinTech Australia's calendar for the year. Interested to know what you'll be partaking in and how important it is from a FinTech Australia point of view to get fintechs together in a centralised location to talk about various topics such as this, and also to have a bit of a chat and to network.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, looking forward to it. We're a firm participant and believer in a heap of the really good things that FinTech Australia do, and we think it's vital that as we build out an ecosystem, we only do it with partners. It's not a product you can go and build on your own and go to market and throw it out there. We do it by working with a lot of amazing partners. So whether that's Intersect or a variety of different roundtables throughout the year, we'll be about.
Excellent, Andrew. Looking forward to catching up at Intersect and the various FinTech Australia events around the country. Even had one in Brisbane recently as well. Thank you so much for giving us an understanding of ConnectID. Thank you so much for giving us a bit of a macro backdrop, an international backdrop, and also what you're up to here locally and all the various stakeholders involved. And congratulations on what you've achieved thus far in this very early stage, but certainly the adaptability and partnerships with the banks, and looking forward to catching up.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the FinTech Australia podcast. I'm your host, Chris Titley. The FinTech Australia podcast is a collaboration between FinTech Australia and Sub11. For more information about membership options, news and the events coming up, jump on to the FinTech Australia website. Have a great day. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.